Hello and welcome to IMHO. Today I'm speaking to Ray Grieselhuber, and we're going to get technical about AI, grounding data, and Google search results powering ChatGPT. He's the CEO of DemandSphere, the CEO of Demand Markets, and he co-founded Functionize. And if that's not enough, Ray also organizes FoundConf, a global event series. Now, Ray, I'm going to jump straight in here. I did some research before coming on here, and I picked up that in a LinkedIn post recently, you said it's the grounding data that matters far more than the model itself. The models will be trained to achieve certain results, but as always, the index data sets are the prize. So, Ray, can you expand and explain on what you said here and just tell me a little bit more about why the grounding data is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we're not going to, unless something radically changes in the way that all of these LLMs work, we're not going to see a situation where we have infinite context window sizes. And so what that means is inevitably, if you need any sort of up-to-date, grounded data about whatever you happen to be doing, you're going to need index data, and that index data has to come from somewhere. And there's various tools that exist within the LM interfaces. You can retrieve pages live, you can do searches and so forth, but inevitably there is a retrieval layer that happens between your chat interface and whatever is going on in the web. And so when you start thinking about, like, if you were putting yourself in the shoes of an engineer at OpenAI, for example, it's well known. I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but it's well known that they have this historical relationship for Bing search results through their API, and it's a good engine, but it's not Google, and they don't have the data that Google has, and they don't have the size of the index and everything else that Google has. And so, if you're an engineer at OpenAI, you're eventually just gonna start scraping Google data, and so we spend we come from the background of SERP analytics, and we do all of the, SERP shape analytics and all that stuff. And so that's all great. But at the same time, we're kind of in this situation now where we are yet again looking at what is showing up in that, what we would traditionally call the 10 blue links or organic search indexes. Just what are the raw search results? How are they being curated by Google? And then how are those results being used within, LLMs? And so that's what I'm usually referring to when I talk about the index being the prize. And this is why I think that despite all of the advantages on, the user experience side and so forth that you have with the ChatGPT and similar experiences, Google still has a massive data advantage and a massive index advantage.
You also went on to say, actually, I picked up another snippet that you said on LinkedIn. The field of SEO encompasses expertise about the study of information retrieval, but then also applies it to marketing and uses it to attract more searchers for commercial purposes. And you'll say in another post, humans are searchers, always have been, always will be. It's just a question of the experience, behavior, and the tools they use. Focus on search as a primitive and being found, and you could ignore pointless debates about what to call it. So where do you think that SEOs are going wrong with their opinion approach to the introduction of GEO LLM visibility? And how do you think they should be approaching LLM visibility?
I think that LLM visibility is very important. I think that we always have had this weird tendency in our industry to talk about it's either dead and dying, or this is the new thing, and you have to just rush and forget everything that you learned up until now. And so it's always this weird dialectical tension between it's either dead and like we're all out of a job tomorrow, or this is the hot new thing and like you have to rename everything and you can't call it SEO anymore. And it's just like all these weird things that to me don't really make sense in the context of what's happening overall, because I always go back to what is the core instinctual human behavior that's going to have an impact on the way that if you're a marketer, your job is to attract human attention through their search behavior. And so that's really what matters. And then really the major question is, what is the experience that's going to mediate that human behavior and their attention mechanisms versus what you have to offer, as a marketer. And so the experience is a lot more important to me than like what we call it. So in our view, and we talk about this a lot, there is not really any such thing anymore as traditional search versus AI search. It's all AI search. Google pioneered AI search more than 10 years ago. They've been doing it for the last 10 years. And now, for some reason, everyone's just figuring out that now it's AI search. And so, really, it's more a matter of like, what is the user experience? And so, the three major user experiences are obviously, SERPs, traditional search experiences. Those are obviously getting impacted by more conversational types things too. And so these are not hard divisions. But you've got SERPs and you've got conversational interfaces like you would use with, Perplexity or ChatGPT, and then you've got these agentic type experiences. And there's like cross pollination between all three of them. So it's not a hard and fast, division between any of them.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it's very exciting times right now. I mean, do you think that our industry potentially might look back on this time as we did, for example, do you remember when Hummingbird came out
Yeah,
and
yeah,
personalization was like this huge
absolutely.
issue?
Yeah,
Um, so it could be
100%.
interesting in a few years where we all look back and see this is a very disruptive time. But actually, I believe that I think the industry is going to come out better for this in the end.
I agree.
Um, I think people will be forced to become the marketers they should have been all along.
100%.
Um, yeah, instead of
Yeah,
ignoring the user. And
yeah,
yeah, so
exactly.
yeah,
No, I fully agree. I think we're having probably more fun than we've had in years, and we've built more cool things, and it's been great, and all the conversations, and it's been really interesting to see. I think our industry, kind of to what you're alluding to a few minutes ago, we're kind of uniquely capable of embracing all this change faster than any other type of business unit when it comes to understanding the basics of how all this new technology is impacting everyone, because we're inherently researchers, and we like to play with toys and build things. And so it's a really interesting mix of skills that will usually land people in within the SEO space. And so I agree with you. I think it's great.
it's just going back to something else you said. You recently shared an article from Tom's Guide that said OpenAI. So this is actually going back to what you just touched on earlier. Actually, you said that OpenAI is using Google's own search results to train and power ChatGPT, and you said that you talked about this at Brighton SEO earlier this year in April, and that people
Yep.
would get mad about the idea that Google was powering ChatGPT's live retrieval. So,
Yep.
why do you think people are actually getting annoyed about this? And for anybody that doesn't know, can you just share some details about what's going on here?
Yeah. So in terms of what's going on, basically what we started to see in our data, we were working on this actually back in like February and March, and we have a whole data warehouse thing that we've built on top of BigQuery, and we're able to look at where basically we did a comparison of what were the citations that were showing up within ChatGPT, and the other engines too, but I would just use ChatGPT as an example. In ChatGPT versus what URLs were appearing in search results for the same query in Google and then Bing, because I wanted to test because as I was doing some manual searches, I started to realize that the results looked a lot more like something I would see on Google versus Bing. And so I would do basically just a simple overlap test. And more, actually about 50% of the time, we were seeing that the results were overlapping with Google versus Bing was something like 15%, 20% of the time. And that was surprising to me because, again, it's well known that OpenAI and Microsoft have had this API relationship for a long time. And so we presented those results in April. And this was before anyone was really acknowledging that Google was being used as the underlying index for a lot of search behavior in ChatGPT. And so at the time, that was, it was just kind of like, okay, we got some people who were interested in it. But it was, I would say, largely ignored at the time. I think it just wasn't registering yet. And I think really over the last few months, it's registered more and a lot more people are picking up on this. But it was funny because in those few months where like it hadn't registered yet to now it's becoming more and more mainstream knowledge, I would talk about this on various online settings. I can't remember the exact event, but I was on one event. I was like a webinar, and a couple of people were just they seemed appalled that OpenAI would be using Google results because it was a known thing that it's all Bing. And so we were kind of just going back and forth, and they seem like they're getting really mad. I'm like, what? I don't understand why this is something to get mad about. It just is what it is. But I think what it comes down to is um, exhaustion with Google, maybe, and also I think there's this perception that since we're doing Gen AI now, we don't have to worry about Google anymore because like everyone is just like making these broad brush statements that people are only going to be on ChatGPT in the future, which I don't think is true either. And so, it's somehow related to that is why I think people are getting upset about it. It's like, oh, yet again, we're dealing with Google still being important here, and that just kind of ran counter to the new AI narrative, is what I basically think it came down to.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting because a lot of people have jumped on Gen AI thinking, oh my God, it's old Gen AI from now on and let's
Yeah,
leave Google behind. But actually, I feel that probably a lot of people are going to get AI exhaustion quite quickly and start to come back to Google because ultimately Google still has, like you said earlier, it still has that data set and it still does have, outstanding search. It's just
yeah,
they're different experiences. So I think they'll probably all be used in sync together with people hopping across channels. Again, comes back to we're going to have to be creative marketers and find where our users are and
yeah.
follow them.
There's
Um,
no silver bullets, is what it comes down to.
this is it, isn't it? Everybody always wants the shortcut.
Yeah,
Everybody always wants the
yeah,
easy answer and they want it handed to them
exactly.
on the plate. And I think SEO has become increasingly more complex and fragmented, whereas, yes, it used to be very easy. It used to be keyword stuffing and 10 blue links. And
Yep,
now you really have to think and be creative and chase your user, and that's probably
yep,
very challenging for some people. So yes, I
definitely.
think there will be a divide of who can and who can't in the next few years.
Yeah, I totally
um,
agree.
you shared a post from the very smart Mark Williams Cook where he shows a visual explanation of why LMs do not use schema in their core training data. But of course, LMs could be using schema in some kind of RAG process.
Yeah,
But literally, it was either yesterday or the day before, a few days ago, the very, very smart Andrea Volpini from WordLift has just research, released some research which demonstrates that, and I'm quoting Andrea here, testing confirms the divide. Sites with comprehensive structured data appear accurately in AI responses, those without risk being misunderstood or ignored entirely. So, Ray, I'm going to throw this up to you. Please clear up this misconception. And what's your opinion and just how useful is schema for LLM visibility?
yeah. I think Andrea's article, I would second that, is fantastic. I think everyone should go read it. And what I really liked about what he did in that article was how he articulated the difference between the different types of tool usage within the conversational experience, because
Yeah.
it depends on which tool is being used when it hits that retrieval layer. In our research, what we've found is that it definitely is, the retrieval layer is really the perfect word for it. And so what's happening is anytime there is a live retrieval that's happening, there, like what we've seen in this shift between April and now, going back to the previous set of questions. What used to happen was it was much more of a direct, here's the query, here's the live retrieval out to whatever tools we're going to use. And fan outs have changed that quite a bit. And so now the fan outs are hitting an internal, again, to use just ChatGPT as example, an internal API, OpenAI retrieval layer where it's doing all the retrieval on the back end. It may actually hit both Google and Bing and then deduplicate all the different results and pull from that. And so that would be within the search experience. But then if they're going based on whatever internal algorithm it has, it's going to then decide whether or not it wants to read specific URLs based on prioritization and relevance to the overall result set that it's trying to create. And if it's doing the search tools, what it's doing is it's basically coming back with more metadata ultimately from schema data that would be surfaced in the search results. And so this would be things like reviews or authorship. When was something updated recently, all sorts of things, knowledge graph data, but all of that, it still is coming via the SERPs. And so it's the SERPs that have been influenced, by the metadata, the schema data that Google has basically trained people to use on their sites. And so that's how the metadata is getting in there. And when it's going to hit a URL directly, it's still doing what we would call more of like a flat content retrieval, basically just flattening the data. It's not really, it may be aware of the schema data there, but I don't think it's using that per se as anything more than a hint. And certainly we don't think that within the LLM itself, it has like this ontological reasoning layer that is using these knowledge graphs as the way to navigate what to prioritize. That's kind of a whole separate thing. So long story short, it depends on which tools are being used. It depends on how the schema data is being pulled through the SERPs. And it's, again, I think it behooves everyone to avoid these dialectical questions of what works. It doesn't, like, it's kind of that's like an orthogonal question of what works or not. It's more about, again, what are the mechanisms for how all of this information is pulled together, and how is that going to impact user behavior, and how is that impact going to most favorably, result in attention for your brands, whatever message you're trying. So that's really what it comes down to. And so that's why I always just I like people like Andrea and Mark, because they're really good at trying to get people to think about the bigger picture versus just like, oh yes, it is using schema. No, it's not using a schema. It's like that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, in my view.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, just really on a very, very basic foundational level, it's not necessarily impacting the LLM, it's actually impacting search data, which the LLM is then pulling from.
Right. Exactly.
Um, but then ultimately, like you say, you're going to have to consider why do you want to apply it? Why do you want to use it? And for what benefit is it
Yeah.
actually having? And how much of an influence is it actually having? Because, it potentially could be fractional.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing about schema in general is that, similar to, you'll hear Mike King talk about how Google used Core Web Vitals to get the entire internet to optimize itself so that Google wouldn't have to spend so much money crawling the internet. They kind of did the same thing with building your semantic layer via schema and knowledge graphs. And so that just obviously enabled them to create an entire new level of richness in the results. And that's just all being manifested directly within the SERPs experience. And that's basically how that gets into any sort of metadata retrieval. And you'll see, ChatGPT build out like comparison tables and everything. And this is one of the reasons why sentiment analysis is much trickier within analyzing these responses than is often acknowledged, because it's not saying, oh, good, bad. It's saying, like, for these specific use cases, there's pros and cons, and you may want to think about this, and here's a comparison table. Like, all of that stuff is being aided greatly by the metadata it's able to retrieve from those search results.
So just a very last quick question, in your opinion, and it doesn't need to be a long answer, but what is the one thing you would recommend that the industry, I'm not going to say just SEO, but the industry,
Yeah.
what should they be focusing on right now?
Broadly, as marketers, again, I think it goes back to, what do people do when they're looking for something and analyzing their behavior. I think one of the tendencies, and as a SaaS data vendor, there's always a temptation, and I wouldn't say temptation, it's just part of what we do, is we're always providing data studies and everything, and there's always these great data studies. Those are useful, but they're only really directionally useful. I think the most important thing you can do is encourage a culture internally within your company of working with your own data and building up your own data sets and experimenting with that and learning from that and understanding what your users and your customers are going to be doing, because those are the people you need to worry about. It doesn't matter what the entire internet is doing. Like it's interesting, but it's, like, if you're selling airline tickets, it doesn't really matter how people are buying dog food. So, like, all the different data studies, aren't necessarily going to be relevant to you. It's going to be much more relevant for you to really just iterate quickly within the things that you can, observe and control. So I think that's a really important thing.
That is so well said. I think that absolutely sums it up, that what one person says works for them doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And unfortunately, I think a lot of SEOs are guilty of taking things verbatim and then trying to apply it, in looking for that shortcut.
Totally.
But Ray, it's been brilliant to speak to you, and thank you very much for offering your humble opinion. Just before we finish, you've got an event, Found Conf, is coming up in Tokyo in October. Is that right? What are the dates for that?
Yeah, October 28th and 29th. So Found Conference is something we've been doing now for probably about 6 or 7 years, but this is going to be our biggest instance of it. And so we're bringing in Ryan Fishkin, Lily Ray, Mike King, Elias Dabas, Noah Lerner, and we've got a lot of great Japanese speakers there too. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it looks like a great conference. Where can people get tickets for that, Ray?
Foundconf.com, conf.com.
Fantastic. And for anybody else who enjoys watching the IMHO series, please subscribe to the channel so that you can keep updated with all the new episodes. And I'll also be starting a newsletter shortly. So if you head over to shelleywalsh.com/IMHO, you'll be able to sign up there and that'll be coming up soon. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Ray, for being my guest. It was
Thank you
wonderful
very
to speak
much.
to you and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Brighton very soon. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.